Hello and most welcome to 1613 of the Heidegger series. We will continue with the writings of Jacques Derrida, Life, Death. And we are currently on page 38. And this is the second session. I think that's the last paragraph. And we've been talking about we, yes, and we've been mentioning different aspects. And we is a homonym of we hearing. Those are important thing here. There is an affirmative repetition of the both traits of Friedrich Nietzsche. He is both his father's death and his mother's life. Ich bin der und der. I am that and that. He is both, and he describes that as evolving a second sight. I think also of a bifurcation we previously pointed to. Das eine bin ich, das andere sind meine Schriften. There's another duplicity here. So it's the double take, not really excluding anything. And it is this difference between the two that sort of tones what is brought forward. If you remember toned and detoned. It's a return, and this is important to understand. The eternal return is what, so to speak, Nietzsche lands in. That he makes a very good first step towards the manuscript and an openness. Das eine bin ich, das andere sind meine Schriften. I am one thing, one of the things, and the other thing is my writings. I will begin with a quote. Chapter of Ecce Homo, titled, Why I Write Such Good Books. Das eine bin ich, das andere sind meine Schriften. I am one thing, my writings are another. Before I discuss them one by one, let me touch on the question of their being understood or not understood. I'll do it as casually as decency permits. For the time for this question certainly hasn't come yet. The time for me hasn't come yet. Some are born posthumously. Someday institutions will be needed in which one may live and teach as I conceive of living and teaching. It might even happen that a few professorial chairs will then be set aside for the interpretation of Zarathustra. But it would contradict my character entirely if I expected ears and hands for my truths already today. That today one doesn't hear me and doesn't accept my ideas is not only understandable, it even seems right to me. I don't want to be confounded with others, not even by myself. This question of teaching and of the new institution is thus also, in some sense, a question of the ear. You know, all that is coiled up in the figure or face, so to speak. In the labyrinth of Nietzsche's ear. I do not want to enter into that here. I will simply note the reappearance of this motif in the same chapter of Ecce Homo. And I will then immediately return. A labyrinth effect to the exegesis taken from Nietzsche's text. Titled On the Future of Our Education Institutions. Here first is the reappearance of the ear in the same chapter of Ecce Homo. All of us know, some even from experience, which animal has long ears. Well then, I dare assert that I have the smallest ears. This is of no small interest to the little woman. It seems to me that they may feel I understand them better. I am the anti-ass per excellence, and thus a world historical monster. I am in Greek, and not only in Greek, the Antichrist. How does this claim to having the smallest, keenest ears, along with this complexity of the I am? I am the both, the double. I sign double. My writings and me make two. I am he the dead, she the living, and so on. How does all this reintroduce us to the reading of On the Future of Our Educational Institutions and to politics, to all the politics at stake here? Let me first reread what, at the end of last week's trajectory, I placed in exegesis for today's session. Instead of the purely practical method of instruction by which the teacher accustoms his pupils to severe self-discipline in their own language. We find everywhere the rudiments of a historico-scholastic method of teaching the mother tongue. That is to say, people deal with it as if it were a dead language. And is as if the present and future were under no obligations to it whatsoever. Obligation, therefore, he is alluding to an obligation with regard to the life of the mother. The mother tongue. Contract and alliance against the debt, against death, with life, the life with her. The living, and since the contract, the alliance, the repeated affirmation is always of language or of the signature in language, with language. Against the dead, against death. Brilliant words here. The life with her, the living, and since the contract, the alliance, the repeated affirmation is always of language or of the signature in language. The first contract of life is a contract of language, with language, with the mother tongue, the maternal language, which is to say, the living language. Living, which is to say, maternal and not paternal, and so on. Our exegesis is now becoming a bit clearer because of the detour through Ecce Homo. History, that is here, the historical science that kills or that treats the dead with the dead. Occupies the place of the father, and the institution must be revived against or despite the father. As if the present and future were under no obligations to it whatsoever. The historical method has become so universal in our time that even the living body of the language is sacrificed for the sake of an anatomical study. But this is precisely where culture begins. Namely, in understanding how to treat the living as something alive. And it is here too that the mission of the cultured teacher begins in suppressing the urgent claims of historical interests, whatever it is above all necessary to do. Properly and not merely to know properly. Our mother tongue, however, is a domain in which the pupil must learn how to do properly. It's a doing, and I say that is incredibly important. It is not just a reference or a representation. It's an actual act. I like that. An actual act. Not merely to know properly, but to do. So we now come to this text that figures among Nietzsche's Juvenilia. As they say, on the future of our institutions of higher learning. In this place where the question of life, death, of she the living, he the dead, of the contract of language, of signature and credit, of the biographical and the biological intersect with the question of the teaching institution. The entire reading trajectory that I offered you by way of the D2 through Ecce Homo was, I believe, indispensable for approaching this so-called early work. And can tentatively serve as a protocol for it. It is not that one should teleologically and retrospectively shed light on the beginning by means of the end and say that Nietzsche was already saying this or that. Retrocausality, I would say. But without giving to this retroperspective the teleological significance it has in the Aristotelian Hegelian tradition, one can appeal to what Nietzsche himself says regarding the credit open with his signature. The delay in the coming due, the difference between what he is and his work, and the posthumous in general in order to complicate the protocols, in order to dissimulate, diffuse or neutralize this text with a view to clearing Nietzsche of everything in it that might be worrisome for a democratic pedagogy or a leftist politics. Or of everything in it that provided the language for the most odious Nazi rallying cries. On the contrary, we will need to pose this question without the least concern for decency, and ask why it is not enough to say that Nietzsche did not think or want this. that he would have vomited all this, and that there is here falsification and mystification in the interpretation and inheritance of this thinking. That is also very important, that there is here falsification and mystification in the interpretation and inheritance of his thinking. To ask why and how such falsification was possible. That's a sight and a half, honestly. Why the same words and the same statements can oftentimes be used in ways that are deemed incompatible, and so on. And why, in the end, as the only institutional initiative to which Nietzsche's teaching on teaching given rise, been Nazi. First protocol. Not only does this text belong to the posthumanists of which Ecce Homo speaks, it is a text that Nietzsche would not have even wanted to be published after his death. Even more, it is not only a posthumous work that Nietzsche apparently never wanted to have published, but also a discourse that Nietzsche actually interrupted along the way. Isn't that interesting? That does not mean that he repudiated the whole thing. And Nietzsche would no doubt have subscribed to what would be the most scandalous to an anti-Nazi Democrat of today. Nevertheless, let us not forget that he never wanted to publish these lectures and even interrupted the writing of them. On 25th of July, after the 5th lecture, he wrote to Wagner, at the beginning of next winter, I will still give my Basel lectures, the 6th and the 7th, on the future of our educational institutions. I want to be done with it, at least in the diminished and inferior form in which I have been treated this theme thus far. For the higher treatment, I must become even riper and seek to educate myself. As it turns out, he will not give these final 2 lectures and will refuse to publish them. On 20th December, he writes to Malvida von Meisenberg. By now you will have read the lectures. And have been startled that the story should break off suddenly after such long prelude, with the first for the real new thoughts and proposals tending more and more to end up in mere negativities and prolixities. One gets parched while reading them, and there is nothing to drink at the finish. What I had in mind for the last lecture a very droll and colorful scene of nocturnal illuminations. Was not exactly suitable for my Basel public. And it was certainly a good thing that the words stuck in my throat. And at the end of February of the following year, you must believe me. In a few years, I will be able to do everything better, and I will want to do so. In the meantime, these lectures have for me the value of an exhortation. They remind me of a debt or of a task that has fallen precisely upon me. These lectures are undeveloped and, in addition, somewhat improvised. Fritsch was ready to publish them, but I swore not to publish any book with respect to which my conscience was not as pure as that of a seraph. Finally, some concluding protocols. It would be necessary to analyze in its own right the narrative and fictional form of these lectures, and what in these lectures of an academic to other academics on the topic of the university and high schools already marks a break in academicism in the academic sense. I will not analyze this for its own sake, for lack of time. It would also be necessary, following the invitation that is extended to us by Nietzsche himself in his foreword, to read slowly as untimely readers who already escaped the law of their time. By taking the time to read, all the time it takes indefinitely. Marvelous sight. And not to say, as I just did, I will not do this for lack of time. It is only by means of this time of reading that one will be able not just to read between the lines, as Nietzsche invites us to do, and read not with a view to getting an overall picture of what we read, as is most often done, but read in view of a meditatio generis futuri, a practical meditation that goes so far as to give itself the time for an effective destruction of high schools and universities. And what Nietzsche asks must happen in the meantime, between the time when new legislators of education in the service of a totally new culture will be born and present time. Perhaps between now and then all gymnasia, yea, and perhaps all universities may be destroyed or have become so utterly transformed that their very regulation may, in the eyes of future generations, seem to be but the relics of the lake dwellers' age. That's the position where we are in now. And in the meantime, he will do for Zarathustra. He advises us to forget and destroy the text, but to forget and destroy it through action. It's building up here. I will take some sites from what we just read here. There is a quite substantial references to double take, double action, double sides, verso and recto, as we mentioned in lecture 1610. The first two sides find on page 39, the bottom, last paragraph, at the end of the last. This is great. It's just grand. It's extraordinary. Obligation, therefore, he is alluding to an obligation with regard to the life of the mother tongue, contract and alliance, the both, against the deaf, dead against death, with life, the life with her, the living. And since the contract, the alliance, the repeated affirmation is always of language, or of the signature in language, with language. The first contract of life is a contract of language with language. I emphasize there, and here you see the signature once more. I sign. I sign the dead to make it alive. You can compare that to the sign of the emperor in Custer's text, the signature that tells when the debt is due. And at page 40, we have another gem. And it's the last 3 lines. Last paragraph. Wherever it is above all necessary to do, and not merely to know properly.
Excuse me, where?
Page 40, the first paragraph.
First paragraph. Okay, thank you. Okay. Thank you.
Our mother tongue, however, is the domain in which the pupil must learn how to do properly. The doing is disappearing already. It is like Nietzsche seeing the signs of the disappearance. Or why not the shadow? It needs to be done and known, not only known. Only to know it's the deadening mechanistic copying of the DNA. Or the modern academia, gymnasium, schools, deadening copying, repetition as one word. It's mechanistic, it's dead. And here on page 41, Nietzsche really blasts it. It's the first paragraph on page 41. Fourth line on the third. Nietzsche did not think or want this, that he would have vomited all this, and that there is here falsification and mystification in the interpretation and inheritance of his thinking. He is inwardly representing the mechanistic copying. To ask why and how such a falsification was possible, why the same words and the same statements can oftentimes be used in ways that are deemed incompatible, and so on. The very same words, exact statements, have a completely different effect because they are not done, they are just known, repeated. Once more, we have the mechanistic copying machine. And here, the importance, page 42. Mint, and this is evocative, do this. To read slowly, it's in the middle of the text. To read slowly as untimely readers who already escaped the law. You were correct from the beginning there. Down a bit. Up, up. Oh, sorry, wrong direction. Down, I mean. I will point to the text here. Now, to read slowly as untimely readers who already escaped the law of their time by taking the time to read. All the time it takes indefinitely, and not to say, as I just did, I will not do this for lack of time. Doing takes time. That's the message. And he's pointing to, and to read in view of a meditatio generis futuri, a practical meditation that goes so far as to give itself the time for an effective destruction of high schools and the university. The slowness and the carefulness, and I would say this is also the careful reading of Derrida. It's almost like a person from a forgotten age. He's so careful, he doesn't miss a bit. And now in this, like soulless copying, we miss all of it. And at the end is some harsh words. If the gymnasia is not destroyed, and this is at the very end of the text, they will evolve, transform, and their very regulation in the eyes of future generations seem to be but relics of lake dwellers' age. That's where we are now. This is the closing of the Western mind, foreseen by Nietzsche, by his incredibly sharp reading and apt mind. He saw this coming. This is where destruction is born, and that turns into deconstruction, bringing action, doing into the scene again. And this is also pointing at this. It is the first step towards the more active Möbius strip that does things, where doing is included because it changes the rotation, the direction. It is not just a circle that goes back to the same circular starting point, where in the end you don't even know where you start, because you have no way of sort of coordinating yourself, knowing where you first put your foot on the circular line. Maybe some words from my dear colleague Kalle on the other side in Barcelona. Hello, Barcelona.
Thank you. Excellent points, and true action is indeed important, as you point out. I will return to the word Bildung. Here, Bildung was on here on this page. Bildung, here. Here. We can ask ourselves what is really Bildung.
Yes.
And let's see Nietzsche's or Derrida's definition of Nietzsche's definition here. Let me see. This is precisely where culture, Bildung, begins, namely in understanding how to treat the living as something alive, and so forth. So we could say the living is like the mother, while the dead is like the father. And this, to return to the lecture from yesterday, in French is Je suis mon père. That is, it means two things. I am my father, but I also follow my father. Suis or suivre, être. So in this case, I would compare actually this father figure to the passive copying of texts. You mechanically.
Yes.
So yes. So in this case, je suis mon père. I'm my father, or I follow my father. It's that you follow the text passively.
Yes.
You follow the text passively. Je suis mon père. Père is there the text.
Try
Yes.
to talk into the microphone more. It's very good what you say. I want to hear it. So please.
Yes. So in this phrase, je suis mon père. I am a father, or I follow my father. The father there is the ancient texts, and also the person who doing the copying. He is the text, and he should only passively copy it. While you have also the mother tongue, so to say, the mother figure, who is something living. That is, you can be creative with these texts that you have in front of you to make them alive. And there is where Bildung begins, namely in understanding how to treat the living as something alive, to quote Nietzsche. And so when we think about this transmission of the ancient texts like the Bible, we have to have this in mind. We have the two things: Bildung in something living. It's not only to copy passively the father figure, and our fathers, the texts represent they're like our fathers, our giants, to use to allude to a famous phrase from the Renaissance that we stand on the giants' shoulders. And the giants are like the father figure. We imitate them. But in order to see further than this, our forefathers, we have to be like a mother that is like a mother tongue. We have to be creative with these texts. And there is nothing bad in them. And the texts themselves, they are also mother, because there are grandmothers and so forth, they are something living. So that was my point. Only an extension of what you said.
Yes, very good. We have to know that this is a fairly new trend to copy in a dead way and go to the original so strongly and don't do the live doing harm to the text by copying exactly, which is the greatest harm you can do, which Nietzsche is pointing out.
Yes, this
is not being true to the intention of the text and copying that way. It's, as Nietzsche calls it here, no, it's only no, it's not doing. And of course, the Bible has never been treated that way before, the ancient texts, but it's a new trend. It's Aristotelian, Platonic. It's almost like, it's very close to what Nietzsche described, a deadening of the text, the death of the gymnasium or the academia. A very good color. That's just alive. It's a doing, and doing is not only knowing; it's knowing and doing. It's if you only know, if you only copy, you lose knowledge, and you lose also the doing.
Absolutely.
And it's a new trend to have this strict copying and go to some scroll somewhere and say these are the correct. It's a radical new take on these things. And it's Aristotelian, Hegelian, Platonic, of course, the underlying philosophy of it. Very good, Cal. Fantastic.
Thank you, sir.
I think we end there. It was a fantastic
Yes.
read. Have a very pleasant afternoon. I just stopped the recording here first.